Okay, so that was our excellent panel that we had. Some great topics were discussed there. We do have a few moments here to take some questions for our panelists. So please feel free to type your question into the chat box, and then we can ask our panelists. I did have a question though for our panelists, for each of you. So based on your experience, what did you think was the most challenging in that first year out of training? And what would you have told your younger self to be more successful?
Okay, I'll answer. So for me, and it was a long time ago, but I think the most challenging thing was feeling like I was supposed to know everything. And that first year out of training is when you learn the most, because there's nobody there to back you up, and you have to make decisions that are not going to be validated by somebody else right after, which is a hard experience to have. So just recognizing that that's a normal learning period for you, and that no one's expecting you to know everything, and that if you really don't know, you should ask your colleagues, because they're there to help you, and that's how you learn. If you just make a mistake and don't find out about it, you're not going to learn. So that's what I wish I had known.
I'll chime in as well. I would say that most challenging thing for me, and this was just 2 or 3 years ago for me, was really learning to juggle it all. Because a lot of things are thrown into your lap all at once. And so people give conflicting advice about whether you should say yes to everything that you're given. And I'm not even sure if I believe one way or the other on this, but I feel like in the beginning, you should say yes to a lot of opportunities you're given, but not too many, because delivery of kind of the results of those opportunities and kind of following through on what you've committed to is so important, especially early on. So I would say that you should weigh kind of how opportunities fit into your career goals before you say yes to something, and not disappoint because you say yes to something you're not really interested in.
I can jump into a little on this. I think in the first year, trying to balance the amount of work you have and your home life at the same time is really important. When I first started, my children were 2.5 and 3 months old. So I think being a sleep deprived brand new employee is challenging. And I think understanding that when your coworkers say, you know, you don't have to clean the list every day, like that is okay. And I think understanding that, like, that you can do that, like listen to them and understand that they're there to kind of support you outside of work as well. I think I felt a little bit of self-inflicted pressure to not ask for things like that, or to be afraid, like, what would they think? And I think everyone is human. And I think remembering that everyone has been a first year employee at some point, and they're going to understand that it does take a little bit of time to get comfortable with the workflow and confidence in your reads immediately. And I think that that's something that people really need to focus on too.
Anyone else have any comments?
Could you repeat the question, Jen? I'm sorry, I had my froze up.
Yeah, no problem. So the question is, so what did you think was the most challenging during that first year out of training? And what would you have told your younger self to be more successful at managing that?
Well, just I'm actually in my first year, so I just left the military, so I just started a new job, and I will say, just after the first few months of the job, is give it a chance. Coming out, I think you're always going to think the grass is always greener, and you're starting a new job and you have certain expectations. You want it to be perfect. And quite honestly, in the first couple of months, there were a few things that I was kind of looking in the mirror and talking with my wife, thinking, I don't know if this was the right choice. But then as time goes on, you seek out people that you're gonna know and you come to rely on within the group, and you just go out and you meet people and you make connections and realize that nothing is going to be perfect, but you have to be open to the new job and all that it has to offer, and make it something as best as you can, make it fit for what you want. There might be a circumstance, and I think one of the earlier speakers alluded to it, several speakers have alluded to it, is that it doesn't have to be your job forever. There is the opportunity to go between academics and private practice, teleradio. I mean, there are so many different opportunities. So you don't have to be miserable. You have to be happy, but but always give it a chance.
Okay. Well, actually, I have a question for Dr. Chung. Do you have a personal story about a difficult personality that you had to deal with, and how did you overcome that situation?
Yeah, so that's a question I often ask in my interviews. So I think it's a very good question, because it's hard to make up an answer for that and be specific. So without being too specific, some difficult personalities are people who are the skeptic, and whatever idea you may have or plans for the organization, they're the ones that point out the problems with it. And so I had one of these people, and I don't want to get too specific so that people can't tell who it is, but there was all right, I'll get a little bit specific. We were going to have fellows from nuclear medicine come and rotate with us the first month of or very early on in their training. And a lot of them in the military especially are not radiologists. So they were going to come and read CTs. And so this person was very upset about that and didn't want it to happen. So before I met with this person, I went and did some research about it, like what do other people do? And then we talked for an hour about it. And in the end, and this was a person who commonly would do their own thing anyway. So we'd have a policy, and then we would she would do what she wanted. And then, but I thought that I would listen, and I had prepared myself to give facts and figures to answer the questions that I thought were likely to come up. And in the end, after the hour, so it was a lot of time invested, but she accepted it and said, okay, you've done your homework. I don't agree, but I feel that you made a decision without, rushing into it. And so I will respect that decision. And she did not fight it, whereas she had with everything else. And so even though I felt, that I shouldn't have to take, whenever I say I shouldn't have to, that doesn't end well, that I didn't want to do that. And it was a lot of effort. It turned out to be worth it in the end, because I no longer had this person, this insurgency against me. And she felt that she was heard, because I did listen and I responded. And in the end, I said, well, I understand your point of view, but I really think that the benefits of this outweigh the risks.
Suzanne, did you have a question? Okay, I'm not. Okay, well, I do have a question for Dr. Geertruyden. So you were talking about networking, and we're all busy. We got crazy schedules. What, in your opinion, have you found to be the most high impact networking route for people that don't have a lot of time to just be looking for different resources?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would say I have found the most opportunities for networking at the state, local, and national ACR meetings or national meetings. Now, I know times are a little different right now with COVID, and we're doing a lot of things virtually. However, when you go to these meetings, whatever that be, if you're interested in academics and it's RSNA or SCARD, I believe it's the Society for Academic Radiologists, or if, depending on whatever you're interested in, the people that attend those conferences, just like today, these are thought leaders. These are leaders within the field of radiology, and they're often people that you will, that are the decision makers, whether that be in a local area, For instance, at the DC chapter, we have the chair of George Washington, we have the chair of MedStar Washington Hospital Center, and these people naturally are interested in organized radiology. And so, and natural byproduct when you meet these people is that they are in and of themselves very well connected. So attending meetings just like those who are tuned in today, the residents, when you had your interviews, you're meeting people, and just like one of the speakers earlier offered, potential job opportunities right here during this, during this session. I mean, these are the types of people that I have always found, again, to have a lot in common with. So I would encourage you to take whatever organization it is you choose. I'm partial to ACR, but also active in other societies, and just pick something, get involved, and all that other things will follow naturally. As I mentioned in the talk, in the recorded talk, is these networking and these relationships will naturally lead to job opportunities and potential research collaborations and such.
Thank you. I do have a question for Dr. Oliveira. Burnout, I think it's just so important for us to discuss it because it's becoming more and more prevalent. In your experience in your practice, how commonly do you see it? And are there any particular early symptoms or signs that we need to be aware of to address sooner than later before it snowballs into a bigger issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we have a group of about 45 people. So it's not, when you see the numbers of 35 to 45% of people having it, or at least claiming it on the surveys with Medscape, I think our practice, I've seen a little bit lower than that, but I have seen multiple people going through it. And it's definitely something to address early, because I feel like with my own experience with it, when you get to the point where you're kind of at your lowest point, it's really hard to think, let me add in things, because a lot of the things that they suggest you do in terms of like extra courses or meditation or gratitude journal, even the idea of taking the 5 minutes to do a gratitude journal, it seems like too much, and I think that when you get to that point is when it's really hard to get out without taking a break and needing to like ratchet back a lot of the things you're doing. So I think when you start to get that sense that you're overwhelmed, and that for me, I notice a lot of inability to concentrate, your mind starts spinning a little bit more than you'd like. And I think that's when you kind of have to realize like you need to take a break, and or maybe slow down on the amount of things that you're saying yes to, so that you can kind of still have time to add in those things that will help for wellness before you get to the point where you're just at the point where you can't add on anything more.
Thank you.
And I want to jump in a little bit and answer a little bit to Peter's too, if I could. In terms of networking, I think a great opportunity is at meetings, and also if you kind of tag team with someone. I'm a outgoing person who tends to like not be afraid to walk up to anyone at a meeting. So I think walking up to someone at the end of their lecture, if they gave, and just saying, that was a great lecture, I'm so-and-so, I'm really interested in this, or I just wanted to connect and say hi, and something just so that they see you face to face. And if you are a little bit more shy, finding a buddy to kind of do that with is great. I've done that at a lot of meetings. Also, when I've gone to AUR with my residents, they'll, I'll often say to them like, okay, who do you want to meet here? Let me introduce you to people. So I think making your desire known that you want to network, so that other people can kind of help you with it, so that you're not just cold calling people and trying to reach out and say, hey, can we grab a cup of coffee? You can actually have someone else kind of facilitate the introduction.
Thank you. So we have a question, I guess, for all of our panelists. Do you have any advice on how to approach a job search or interview for those with chronic medical conditions?
I can take a stab at that. I think the most important thing is to be open and honest about that that issue and what your limitations may or may not be. So I think that more and more, there are opportunities for either part-time employment. I know it used to be in the private practice that they would expect you to be a full FTE, but more and more you have people that are doing like more hybrid situations, work situations. And so if you're not able physically, for whatever reason, whatever your situation is, that maybe it's, you have a lightened schedule or you can't do certain things. And so I think being open and honest and really upfront about it and saying, look, if this isn't going to be a potential fit given my situation, then just move on. But I would start with that. And if you have the impression that that group or whoever it is open to that, then I would proceed with that. That would be my only advice.
Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in?
Well, I think that the worst thing, as was pointed out, is unmet expectations. So if you are upfront, I think that more and more we're seeing that one size doesn't need to fit all, that groups can accommodate various types of work needs, whether they be family needs, health needs, or other types of limitations. It's just the idea of being honest ahead of time so that there are no issues later on.
Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in? We do have one more question here. Question is, how much does where you did residency and fellowship dictate job opportunities, excluding networking?
Well, what do you mean by excluding networking? That is a big part of where you train and where you might want to get a job. For example, I'll give you a true life example. In Florida, at the Florida Radiological Society, we have anywhere from 60 to 70 residents and fellows attend the meeting, and it's a phenomenal way to network and to meet prospective employers. In fact, at the next meeting, if we're able to have an on-site meeting, we're going to have a job fair. So where you train means a lot in terms of your ability to network. That said, prior to COVID, the hiring, the market, job market was red hot. It was a residents and fellows market, not a group market. And I think there's no reason to believe that within the next couple of months, it's going to return to that same heated market. So networking is less important in a hot job market, but very important nonetheless.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I can say a thing or two. I would say that as a recent kind of transplant into the academic attending life, I think that the reputation of the training programs that you were in do matter. And not only just by name, I think it means a lot more about the skill sets that trainees from those programs come out with matter a lot. I was asked routinely about, we've had, in my interviews, I was told that we've had really wonderful candidates come through from your institution. They ended up being wonderful, whether it was in musculoskeletal or not. So I think they do, they don't dictate what you can and can't do, but they do help if you are coming from strong programs.
Can I also just mention, a personal experience? I know they didn't mention medical school, but for example, I come from Baghdad and I did my medical school in Baghdad University. And when I came to this country to interview, wanting to do residency, I knew that I was going to interview with American graduates coming from really amazing medical schools, including, you know, Harvard and UPenn and all of those schools. And that, you know, made me a little anxious. But at the end, in my personal experience, what helped me really was networking, because I worked at different places. I did a lot of research. I worked at the ACR before I went into residency, and I just met, you know, fabulous people that helped me connect with, you know, talk about the ACR and talk about different things at the interviews. And I ended up, you know, in a really good program. I ended up doing the fellowship that I wanted. And that did not dictate at all what kind of job that I ended up in. I was in private practice in a really highly reputable practice in DC, and then now at Georgetown University. So my personal experience, that did not affect you know, the outcome at all.
Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in?
I'll actually echo some of that, and just you know, sometimes at the very, very large reputable institutions, sometimes I've found that residents, fellows, or the fellows coming out are super specialized in one area, and that's great if you're going to go into an academic type setting. But that being said, if you're going into a private practice model and you are super specialized in one part of radiology, then private practice, you need to be able to cover across specialties. Dr. Boyd mentioned it earlier, you need to be able to read mammography. So sometimes it can be a hindrance in terms of what you want to do. So, you know, even like programs where they don't have fellows, actually sometimes those residents come out even stronger because they are able to get exposed to a lot of different parts and able to do procedures across the board, LPs, orthograms, all these things that the fellows typically might do in a highly subspecialized big academic center. So there's pros and cons. I think you need to, if you're going into the private sector, you need to make yourself as versatile and expand your skill set so that you can help cover those, you know, those kind of holes in the schedule and such.
Perfect.
Yes, I was just going to say I could answer a little bit too. I trained at a small community hospital for residency, and I think going to a larger academic center for fellowship, I kind of had a little bit of exposure, but I think the things that can kind of limit you are sometimes in your head. You know, I think it was always my fear of like, oh, I'm the small little fish going to the bigger pond with fellowship. And then in terms of career options, you can do anything. You just have to take some time to kind of get used to a different environment. Where I am now is like a hybrid place. So I have the opportunity to do a lot more academic work. But again, training without having that exposure, I think it took me a little bit of time to kind of build up confidence in those areas and realize that I can add value in this without having to be, you know, a researcher designing new MR sequences. So I think understanding that there's a lot more opportunities out there, even if you haven't seen them in the training that you've had before, and know that you can kind of expand your skill set even when you aren't attending.